like to introduce Major Joseph Aletti. Sir, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're at. Again, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. And thank you for all of you taking your time out of your day to listen to this. This is a very interesting topic that I love to talk about because you can see it everywhere in your daily lives, especially in the office or wherever your work center is. I'm a big supporter and advocate for using history as a teacher to help us learn from other people's mistakes and successes. There is more to learn from history, though, than just dates and locations. If you can understand leaders within their unique historical context, then you can derive meaningful lessons learned instead of just trying to emulate their actions and expecting similar results. One of my favorite historical comparisons is when you look at the Simple Sabotage Field Manual and the Skunkworks method. This comparison offers valuable lessons in leadership and innovation, which any airman can use to simply be better airmen. When I was a brand new butter bar, the CIA declassified the Simple Sabotage Field Manual from World War II. This document had been classified since 1944, which means for over 60 years, by definition, the unauthorized disclosure of its contents could reasonably be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. This field manual discussed how leaders and followers should behave in order to have the most detrimental effect on their organization and work centers. In the context of Air Force professional military education, it literally tells you how to be a bad airman. At the same time I was being introduced to these sabotage concepts, I was also going through my initial acquisition officer training, where I learned about innovative organizations like the legendary Lockheed Skunkworks division. Skunkworks is responsible for classic military aircraft like the U-2 and SR-71. These incredible feats of engineering were made possible by equally incredible feats of leadership and innovation, which can be summed up as the Skunkworks method. As I progressed in my career, these two concepts stayed in my mind as I bounced from acquisitions to intelligence to space to recruiting and back to acquisitions. During my broad career, I was exposed to multiple cultures within the Air Force, and I realized any organization can fall victim to acts of unintentional sabotage by well-meaning leaders and followers. Conversely, I found that any organization can benefit from leadership and followership principles enshrined in the Skunkworks method. What I like about the comparison between the Simple Sabotage Field Manual and the Skunkworks method is that they were designed to achieve opposite results. At Lockheed, Kelly Johnson developed and practiced the Skunkworks method after a lifetime of design experience, figuring out how to make better technical, programmatic, and leadership decisions, which would ultimately result in better aircraft. But before Kelly Johnson, Wild Bill Donovan at the Office of Strategic Services had already put together a Simple Sabotage Field Manual for the ordinary citizen saboteur. Donovan's field manual described exactly what an ordinary citizen could do to secretly sabotage their workplace. It literally instructs you on how to demoralize your subordinates, frustrate your superiors, and most importantly, undermine innovation. We'd be foolish not to understand and apply the positive attributes of these examples while avoiding the negative. So let's take a look. Slide. Bill Donovan grew up in New York State. He earned the nickname Wild Bill and the Congressional Medal of Honor in the Army during World War I. After the war, he remained in the National Guard as a colonel, but he was on track for a successful legal career. His social network was strong enough to propel him into politics, and as charming as he was, Donovan would have made a fine politician. Before America entered World War II, Donovan conducted extensive travel in Europe and gathered valuable information regarding friend and foe alike. These trips helped identify weaknesses in the American intelligence system, namely the lack of a central intelligence agency to coordinate national objectives, train and recruit overseas operatives, and process intelligence from across the stovepiped U.S. intelligence community. Donovan feared the nation wasn't prepared to wield the same sophisticated propaganda and espionage strategies employed by the Nazis. Through his personal connections with President Roosevelt and other government officials, he convinced FDR to appoint him as the first coordinator of information, which reported directly to the president. This didn't sit well with the FBI, the State Department, or the military. But FDR didn't mind because he thought that if you picked the right people, even if they disagreed, then competition among their ideas would lead to the best idea winning out. The duties were intentionally vague and included things like collect and analyze all information and data which may bear upon national security and perform other unspecified supplementary activities for the president. To Donovan, other supplementary activities meant psychological operations and sabotage. His position was later renamed, and he grew his meager staff into an entire agency, the Office of Strategic Services. Donovan was promoted to brigadier general, and by the fall of 1943, he single-handedly transformed the OSS into the nation's first international spy agency. The OSS had a notorious reputation for oddball projects and departments, all of which were deemed necessary by Donovan. To the ire of the budget bean counters, the agency dabbled in everything from phony businesses to groundbreaking James Bond gadgets. But as the war blazed on, the agency provided valuable intelligence and covert support to both European and Pacific theaters. In January of 1944, the Allies controlled most of northern Africa and southern Italy, but the Normandy invasion was still 6 months away. A European victory was not guaranteed. Leading up to this point, the OSS had smuggled operatives and material into Nazi Germany, Nazi-occupied territory, to help the Allies prepare for land battles in Europe. The OSS was using every method they could think of to help set favorable conditions for the Allies. The OSS understood that not everyone in Europe supported the Nazis, and some of these people could be convinced to resist the Nazi war effort. But in order to enlist more supporters, the OSS would have to cast a wide net. The OSS would have to engage and empower the entire spectrum of the population. Slide. In Europe, the OSS was already recruiting specially trained saboteurs to degrade, disrupt, and destroy military targets. As an example, these specially trained operatives were folks with prior military training or miners with experience working with explosives. But the call to arms would have to resonate with the ordinary citizen, factory workers, railroad workers, and government employees. However, the ordinary citizen couldn't be relied upon to develop and execute meticulously planned attacks against fleeting or heavily defended military targets. So what could the ordinary citizen do? In an electrical circuit, you generally want to reduce the overall resistance to achieve more efficiency. The lower the number, the better you're doing. In an electrical circuit, if you increase the resistance, then generally speaking, you're using more power than required and run the risk of damaging or destroying the circuit altogether. If the OSS was to increase the overall resistance in the Nazi war machine, it was crucial they devote time and effort to help the ordinary citizen add their resistance to the system. But how did the OSS plan to empower the ordinary citizen? Slide. How do you solve any problem? Gather your best people and give them the task, right? OSS agents were paid to sit around a table and expend brain power on how to help ordinary citizens slow production and slow processes. Like any important high-vis hot tasker, I'm sure this action started off with a meeting. Donovan had a hands-on leadership style, so I'm sure he briefed the action officers himself. I'm sure they gathered around the team, around the conference table, and explained how he needed a simple sabotage handbook for the ordinary citizen. Now, I can't stress ordinary citizen enough. No special tools, no special planning, no special training. The manual is designed to explain how simple sabotage is different from traditional notions of sabotage, how simple sabotage can have an effect on the war effort, and provide suggestions on how these people can execute these simple sabotage acts. This field manual wasn't improvised. I can't stress this enough. A group of OSS agents were paid to research and document the many ways an ordinary citizen could sabotage their workplace and, in general, be disruptive without getting in trouble. Slide. The authors started off by characterizing simple sabotage so that the ordinary citizen would see these acts as something within their ability to accomplish. Simple sabotage is based on universal opportunities to make faulty decisions, universal opportunities to adopt non-cooperative attitudes, and to induce others to follow suit. These activities are responsible for accidents, delays, and general obstructions even under normal circumstances. So all you have to do is make faulty decisions, adopt a non-cooperative attitude, and get others to do the same. Sounds pretty simple, right? Simple enough that anyone can do it. Next, they described the effects. Acts of simple sabotage that require no destructive tools and produce little to no physical damage can produce damage by highly indirect means. Acts of thousands of citizen saboteurs can be an effective weapon against the enemy. Slashing tires, starting fires, starting arguments, acting stupidly. They actually put that in the manual. The OSS asserted that starting arguments and acting stupidly can be just as an effective waste of material, manpower, and time as slashing tires and starting fires. They continue. Acts like these occurring on a large scale will be a constant and tangible drag on the war effort, and at the very least will frustrate and demoralize administrators and police. Before the authors dove right into examples of simple sabotage, they felt the need to reorient the citizen saboteurs. They would have to reverse their thinking, keep your tools dull, not sharp, be lazy and careless. For the average person, these thoughts aren't natural. Most people want to work well and contribute to the organization. So the manual would have to spend a little time helping to foster a state of mind that anything can be sabotaged. Before we get into the examples, I want to remind you that this entire field manual was classified and distributed secretly behind enemy lines. It even came with a statement that the contents should be carefully controlled and not come into unauthorized hands. This book and its contents were considered dangerous. Slide. All right, so what were some examples? The suggestions in the manual are generally grouped by work center. The manual describes how most mundane mistakes can cause frustration and generally slow down production or processes. Things like being interrupted at your desk multiple times a day with wrong number phone calls. A sloppy mail clerk who delays delivery of an important message by a whole day, all because they put the letter in the wrong sack. The clumsy mechanic who accidentally breaks a rare tool at the motor pool, resulting in lower vehicle availability because the shop is waiting for the tool to be replaced. These aren't mistakes that will get you arrested. In some cases, you may not even be reprimanded. They're part of the normal circumstances of the specific workplace, and that is the whole idea. Let's focus on the examples pertaining to organizations, meetings, managers, and employees. For organizations, it is recommended that no decision be made by an individual. All decisions should be made by a committee of no less than 5. At that time, committee was a blanket term for any working group like an integrated product team or a steering group. For meetings, if something had been previously decided, that decision should be reopened at the next meeting and the merits should be rediscussed. For managers, at every opportunity, you should promote and reward those employees with a known reputation for substandard performance. This one is a twofer, because if you promote a non-performer into a position with more responsibility, then presumably they'll make faulty decisions in their new elevated position. And if you reward a non-performer, it will slow production by lowering the morale of the surrounding workers. And finally, for employees, work slowly. Make as many interruptions to your day as possible. Do your work poorly and blame it on bad equipment. Complain that bad tools or bad processes are preventing you from doing your job right. After hearing all of that, do you see how this manual was written specifically to slow organizations down? Do you think innovators would feel empowered or motivated under these circumstances? No, of course not. Slide. So how do you empower and motivate the innovators in your organization? Well, President Truman didn't share FDR's management philosophy, especially the part about competition among your inner circle. So immediately after World War II, the OSS was unceremoniously disbanded, and a small fraction of remaining functions were parceled out to various other government agencies. It would still be a few years before the National Security Act of 1947 would establish the CIA. This meant all those unemployed OSS agents would need to find jobs. I haven't been able to prove it yet, but I'm convinced that the action officers who wrote the field manual eventually found themselves working at Lockheed with Kelly Johnson, where they helped establish the culture of innovation that Skunkworks became known for. Skunkworks made a reputation for itself by creating complex, highly effective military aircraft in a short amount of time and on budget. They were able to accomplish all of this because of the innovative culture that the first two directors, Kelly Johnson and Ben Rich, created and sustained. Kelly Johnson spent his early career on the test and manufacturing side of aviation design work before he became a respected engineer and business leader. He understood how to motivate technical specialists and empower them to achieve record-breaking accomplishments. A few of my favorite Skunkworks tenets are things like the program manager should be delegated complete control of programs in their purview, to include technical, finance, schedule, and operations decisions. Reporting and reports should be minimized at all costs. High performers should be promoted and recognized for their work. And finally, you should never tolerate mediocrity. But this doesn't mean you should fire the bottom 10% every year. It means substandard performers should be told what they're doing wrong and mentored to help them achieve more. Slide. If you know what to look for, there are no shortage of contemporary examples of both methods. Today, I'll focus on three: Tesla's Model 3 production, the Mars Climate Orbiter, and Flint, Michigan. Slide. In 2018, Tesla was struggling to meet their production goals on the Model 3. Understandably, Elon Musk was trying to take action that would have the overall effect of increasing production of the new, affordable Tesla vehicle. This was a critical juncture for the company because it meant Tesla could crack in to the mid-priced car market and sell to the average person. An email from Elon Musk was leaked to the press, in which he instructed employees to do things like cancel large meetings, or if a meeting had to occur, keep it short. Walk out of meetings or hang up on phone calls if they're not serving a useful purpose. Avoid acronyms or nonsense words. Now, what I really like about this is that within the Simple Sabotage Field Manual, they talked about using complex jargon to confuse stakeholders. Then, years later, Skunkworks emphasized speaking plainly in order to communicate more effectively with stakeholders. Elon went on to warn managers who insisted on hierarchies would soon find themselves working elsewhere. And he even recommended ignoring the company's rules if following them was obviously ridiculous. I would humbly submit that Elon channeled his inner Kelly Johnson by how much he empowered his employees to focus on the mission, in this case, producing the Model 3, and how much he insisted on a flat, no-nonsense organization. In this case, Tesla was able to overcome their production problems, and especially here in the DC area, you can see Model 3s everywhere. The next two case studies are examples where physical damage was accomplished through highly indirect means. Slide. The Mars Climate Orbiter was launched in 1998 and was designed to study the Martian climate. Like most scientific spacecraft, many teams were involved in the design and build of the final product. The navigation team was from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the space vehicle team was from Lockheed. The JPL navigation system was expecting metric units as an input, but the Lockheed components were outputting imperial units. The program lacked sufficient end-to-end testing of the complete system, so when the orbiter was launched, the system as a whole had never been tested in real-world conditions. Worse yet, the JPL team noticed the orbiter making an unusual number of maneuvers trying to correct itself, but they didn't think to share these unusual observations with the Lockheed team. The day before it reached the red planet, everyone realized what had happened. But by then, the satellite was headed on a collision course instead of an orbital capture. The mismatch of units resulted in the thruster commands being off by a factor of 4.45. Over the course of the 9-month journey to Mars, that meant the orbiter was nearly 100 miles closer to the surface than it should have been. In Space Force terms, what happened next is called a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. In Air Force terms, the nearly $200 million marvel of modern science burned up like a bottle rocket on the 4th of July. Physical damage through highly indirect means. In 2011, the city of Flint, Michigan was flat broke. The automobile industry had left town, taking nearly half of the population and their taxes along with it. In the face of a $1.1 billion bill for unfunded pensions, the city was required to cut the police force in half. But that wasn't enough. So the state of Michigan sent emergency managers to help the city balance their budget. These emergency managers had the power to cut through red tape to make necessary and often politically unpopular budget decisions. To help save money, it was decided the city would stop buying water from Detroit and instead temporarily pull water from the Flint River. But the new water source had a different composition than the previous source and required a different treatment. Experts told the city a corrosive inhibitor was required to prevent the lead, which was already in the pipes, from leaching out and contaminating the water as it flowed through the pipes. The city failed to add the inhibitor, and lead contaminated the water. However, for more than a year, the city resisted making further changes to the water source and denied anything was wrong. But eventually it was proven by independent parties that lead was in the system. These two examples had awful outcomes, but both were created by faulty decisions and non-cooperative attitudes. No one took control of the orbiter and drove it into Mars, and no one dumped truckloads of lead into Flint's water. These examples show that even under normal circumstances, physical damage can occur through highly indirect means. Slide. Kelly Johnson once said, and I quote, "Skunkworks applies the simplest, most straightforward methods possible to produce new projects. All it is really is the application of common sense to some pretty tough problems. The real secret to innovation is simple. It's the people. In a technical sense, our culture encourages doing things that have never been done before." End quote. Bill Donovan called this the human element and advised the citizen saboteur to discover what types of faulty decisions are normally found in their kind of work and devise acts of simple sabotage to enlarge that margin of error. Before we move on from here, I want to point out that the F-35 is a Skunkworks aircraft. Was it on time? On cost? What happened? The operational environment changed. Cultures are not perpetual. They depend on people. Circumstances and incentives can change the way people behave, which can change the culture. So, what's next? What can any of us do with this information? Slide. Well, these lessons apply anywhere, but we all work in the defense enterprise. This complex system of systems operates the same as an electrical circuit. Simple acts of innovation by thousands of individuals can decrease resistances, and added together can have the effect of decreasing the overall resistance of the system. Just like an electrical circuit, the lower the number, the better we're doing. In order to achieve the greatest levels of reduction, the entire spectrum of potential innovators needs to be engaged and empowered to take action within their sphere of influence. We can't rely solely on specially trained innovators like those at AFWorks and Kessel Run. If we arm the ordinary service member with the right field manual, then all of us can help reduce resistance to improve the overall efficiency of the defense enterprise. We need field manuals to explain how to empower and motivate the workforce, how to make sound decisions and adopt cooperative attitudes, how to foster a state of mind that anything can be improved. And we need this information disseminated as widely as possible. There are 2 books that I found that satisfy these requirements. Both books have surprisingly long titles, but I promise they'll help streamline your work center without making things worse. Slide. The 9 chapters of Simple Sabotage, a field manual for detecting and rooting out everyday behaviors that undermine your workplace, follows the simple formula of quote the Simple Sabotage field manual, explain the act of sabotage, explain what is a useful example versus a sabotage example, and ends with tools and methods to avoid the sabotage while preserving the usefulness. I found the most valuable parts of this book to be when it explains what is not sabotage. Creating committees or working groups isn't inherently an act of sabotage. Committees and working groups can bring experts together to tackle large, complex problems. However, if a person's job becomes a committee's job, then that can sometimes mean it's no one's job because responsibility has been diffused and no one is personally accountable. This is sabotage. Or if work is assigned to a committee with broad membership, no clear objectives, and no deadlines. This is sabotage. For meetings, reconsidering a decision can sometimes be a good thing. The ability to change course can be a sign of a healthy culture where people aren't afraid to speak up. The trick is to identify the reasons why people ask to reopen decisions. Understanding their motives will help you decide if the pause is warranted or if the decision should stick. The authors added the last chapter, Sabotage by CC Everyone, as a new form of sabotage from the modern era. This sabotage involves inundating coworkers with frequent updates and massive distribution lists to anyone even remotely involved in a project. Modern saboteurs can use a lengthy CC line to claim, "I told you," or "you should have known," even though receipt of the email doesn't mean all of the individuals read the message. They describe a few more examples about what is and is not sabotage by CC, but among their solutions, they suggest establishing a culture that knows email is not a substitute for personal dialogue. Slide. Oh, I'm sorry, go back. The second, and hands down more fun to read book, is The Simplicity Cycle, a field guide to making things better without making them worse. To help illustrate the concepts in the book, the author created a figure, or graph, as a map to lead a conversation with the reader. The figure has complexity on one side and goodness on the other. The author states and restates throughout the book that simplicity is not the point. Goodness is the point. A sack of flour is extremely simple. However, there is more goodness if you add water, yeast, heat, and time, which turns the flour into bread. But what is goodness and who defines it? The customer defines what goodness is. The engineers, the inventors, the chefs, the designers, they all have a say, but ultimately the customer has the final word. The author, Dan Ward, is a retired Air Force officer and has plenty of examples to prove to the reader it doesn't matter if you're designing software, spacecraft, presentations, or pizzas. Your goal is to create something good. Simplicity is a tool, and like most tools, you need to use it properly to achieve your objectives. The simplicity cycle is useful for technical designs, but it also comes in handy when you're trying to simplify your business processes and office workflows. Like any technical system, processes have components which can be rearranged and simplified to create a process with more goodness for the stakeholders. A complex process will discourage use. However, a simple process may not achieve the desired effect. The simplicity cycle can help guide your team to find that sweet spot between the two extremes. Both books can help your workplace identify sabotage, arm you with tools to discuss the problems, and provide suggestions on how to fix the issues. After hearing this discussion and discovering these resources, as leaders, you have a responsibility to create opportunities to make innovative decisions, adopt cooperative attitudes, and induce others to follow suit. That concludes my briefing. Are there any questions? I see we necked it down quite a bit, but Ashley, over to you.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I was listening and talking about the one of the guides you mentioned that, they changed the way people talk to be more simplistic, right? So there's actually the plain act law that I found researching. I thought that was interesting that that's actually out there. So I just wanted to mention that. You can look it up in Tongue and Quill too. It's actually pretty interesting to find. And then you hear a bunch of jargon, and sometimes you're like, I should just really take this article. But thank you so much.
Yeah, no, and that's a good reference point, right? Because in law, right, the National Defense Authorization Act every year and the Defense Appropriations Act, the ordinary service member can read through those documents to understand what the intent of Congress is every year. In acquisitions, typically programs get more budget or less budget depending on what those two laws say. But you're right. They are traditionally not written very simple, and I'm sure it took a large amount of institutional capital to change the direction of that institutional inertia, right? Because once something is done year after year, time after time, every single year, more and more laws get passed by Congress. It can become very easy to say, well, it's how we've always done it. We've always used this old-timey 1800s language that doesn't make sense anymore. We've always done it that way, so why would we change? But it does take capital. It does take character capital or and integrity capital for someone to stand up and say, no, look, hey everybody, gather around. We got to fix this because this is getting ridiculous. But those kinds of things can change, and so you're right. The simple you have the name of it. The what?
Plain act law.
Right. Yeah, the plain act law. So that was the attempt to say, hey, look, we've got to polish up the way we write laws because it's ridiculous. We're using this old-timey language no one understands, but there was a benefit to using that language because you could slide more things into it and people wouldn't notice it, right? Mm-hmm. Just like the saboteurs who, were taking advantage of the situation by creating more jargon to create more confusion, depending on what you're trying to do, right, you either want to create more confusion or create less confusion. And so, it's a good example of where, finally the government said, hey, look, enough of this, enough's enough. We're going to, write things plainly so that the average person the average citizen can understand what these laws mean. If you read through the National Defense Authorization Act today, you may disagree that it's you may disagree about whether it's plain or not, but it's certainly better than what it used to be, I suppose. But yeah, no, it's all about frame of mind, right? Where for the saboteur, that manual, and it's a short read, so I recommend everybody, Google Simple Sabotage Field Manual, CIA. You should find a link to it fairly easily. It's amazing how short it is, and it's amazing how in those short those short handful of pages, it's something like 50 pages long maybe, they go through an extreme amount of detail on how to reorient yourself and explain the benefits. In their context, it's all about stopping Nazi Germany, that kind of stuff. But as you read it today, you can understand, this is a playbook for being a bad airman. Non-cooperative attitudes, starting arguments, all this stuff. This is exactly what you would tell somebody if you were to tell them, hey, I want you to be a bad airman. like, well, just do everything this book says. And so naturally, if you do the opposite, you're going to be, like the Skunkworks method, wrote down, you're going to be a good airman. You're going to be a good, you're going to have a good culture. You're going to have a good thing, So it's, but you're right. It's all about that frame of mind, and using words to help frame the situation.
So I did look at it because I know you had sent it to me because we were having a talk, and I was thinking, I need to listen to the brief before I start asking questions because I may not have all the information, but you're absolutely right. I started reading this and I was like, wow, it's really not that difficult it's a short read. It's super easy to get something out of. It's not, I mean, you can see it here and I'm showing it live because I think I think you make a valid point here that, simplicity is a good way to go if you need to get the things done. And I've read several emails before from people like, the BLF, bottom line up front, tell me what it is, So I think reading this, it was very interesting. So I appreciate you sending it to me.
Absolutely, yeah. What I appreciate about the World War II era of documents, because there's all manner of manual written during the war. They're always written very plainly, and I think that's because the reading level at the time was different than what we consider today, right? They say that the New York Times is written for an 8th grade level or something to that effect. Well, back then it was written even more plainly because even fewer people read well. And so it's written very plainly, right? But what I again, what I go back on is that these people sat around the room. Their boss told them, "Hey, everybody, I need you to write a book on how to be a bad airman, how to be a bad bureaucrat, how to be a bad factory worker." And then they spent the next, I don't know, day, week, month, something. They spent time. They came into the office, 8 a.m., sat down, pen and paper, put their ideas, day after day, 8 hours a day, however many times a day, and then they produced this book, right? That does that. It tells you it instructs you on how to be a bad employee, and the most important thing is without getting caught. Right? Anybody can be a bad employee. I go into the office, I unplug all the computers, I kick the computers into the hallway, but it takes finesse, right? It takes a certain level of boldness to be a bad employee that doesn't get reprimanded, that doesn't get arrested. And this handbook, tells you how to do that. And I find it fascinating, right? That I'm sure, I know we've got only have a handful of people in the audience now, but I'm sure even these handful of people can, imagine instances in their workplace, whether they've been in the Air Force for 2 weeks or 20 years. Imagine the instances in their workplace where they've seen some of these things at play. They've seen somebody somewhere in some work center do something like this, right? Whether that's the supply clerk who tells you, "Oh, nope, sorry, come back tomorrow. You don't have the right form," or "Nope, sorry, go back to the end of the line. You don't have the right form." That's sabotage, right? By the definition and what they tell you in this manual, that non-cooperative attitude, right, versus a cooperative attitude of, "Hey, look, Airman so-and-so. Hey, look, Lieutenant so-and-so. Hey, look, Colonel so-and-so. Yeah, you had the wrong form. Next time, can you do it this way? I'll go ahead and help you now, but, just try to, the form says this for a reason, so please try to do this next time." And then they continue to help you, right? That's two different things. The first outcome is you go back to the end of the line, you're disgruntled, now you're in a bad mood, you go back to your office, you're in a bad mood in your office, and maybe you make a faulty decision because you're in a bad mood. When I was in high school, they used to tell us, don't drive when you're angry. As high school students learning how to drive for the first time, they would tell you that, hey, look, if you're upset, you're more apt to make a mistake while driving. So don't, to save yourself, don't drive while you're angry. Well, the same thing applies in everyday life, right? As an adult. Now that person goes back to the office, they're disgruntled, they're gonna, they have a bad experience. Maybe they complain to their coworkers for 30 minutes. They go on a 30-minute tirade about the supply clerk that did them wrong, right? They just wasted 30 minutes of someone else's time complaining to their coworker back at the office. So you can see how these things snowball, right? And it's all about the frame of mind that anything can be sabotaged, that supply clerk is not going to get a reprimand, right? They probably also won't get kudos if they're have a positive attitude. So again, it's all about working within that margin of error, right? Now, if they're extremely helpful, then yeah, they're going to get kudos. And if they're extremely disgruntled, well, then yeah, they're going to get probably talked to because some complaint or whatever. But yeah, like I said, this book tells you how to do it wrong, and it's amazing to me how often we see people, again, unintentionally. No one's trying to be a sabotage, right? No one's a Russian spy or a Chinese spy, per se, trying to sabotage us. But typically these things are unintentional.
It's really cool. I'm even still, it's neat. Various media. Obviously, we all know that there's media issues out there that can make people disgruntled, as you say. But I do think it's a really interesting topic, and I'm really appreciative of you spending some time with us and talking about it, because I would have never even thought to look at any of this. But it's and I've seen a lot of it too, as you were talking. People that are, oh, I have a problem with this or that, so I can't do this. I've heard it before, so it's very relatable. But I
Yeah.
definitely appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the benefit to that first book that I described, the blue one, that the title, "The Simple Sabotage: A Modern Field Manual." What I like about that one is it describes both sides of the coin, right? Where someone, you might have an airman that says, "Hey, look, I'm having a hard time with this task because the process is broken," right? Now that statement may be true, right? That airman may have encountered a process that is truly broken and that does need to be addressed in some form or fashion. That's not sabotage inherently, right? To complain about some process. What would be sabotage, according to this book, would be, if they spend an hour telling their 5 best friends in the workplace, about this complaint, that at the end of this hour-long tirade, they're no closer to a solution than when they started, right? That's not helpful. That's actually wasting now 5 people's time, because it's the original airman plus his 4 friends. So you just wasted 5 man-hours, of time, right, where they could have been doing something different. Now on the flip side, right, if that airman was to come to you and say, "Hey, look, I'm trying to do this task. This process is broken," and then you spend the next hour with your 5, best friends at the work center, coming up with ideas of how to make the process better, right? And then elevating that solution to their supervisor. That's not sabotage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the airman doesn't own that process, so they can either sit there and complain about it, or try to help find a solution. But in either case, they may not own that process. Now, if they own that process, let's say that they're a finance, airman, and they're the NCO responsible for this particular process. If they have no reason to keep that process as broken as it is, if it's like, well, yeah, it's this way because that's how the last guy did it, and that's how I'm going to do it, that's sabotage. Because they're not actively, they understand that they have a broken process, but they're not trying to fix it. But if they, say, "Oh, I didn't even know, I didn't realize that this was broken because, I don't see the other end of this thing, and oh my goodness, yeah, oh, thanks for the solution. Let's try to, let me talk to so and so, and we'll get this fixed," or whatever. I personally, in my career, I found wet signatures to be one of those things, where typically the AFI was outdated and wet signatures were mandated. Years after they had been, the digital signatures had been approved. So to me, it's always irritating when I see wet signature mandatory, and I always try to push back on that whenever I see it, but sometimes I can't. But again, if we all just try to, again, foster the state of mind that anything can be improved. And again, the second book will tell you an improvement is not always a simplification, although it most often can be. You can get too simple and then it's not useful anymore. So again, if we can all foster a state of mind that anything can be improved, then, we'll leave, each of us, when we leave PCS, we'll leave the position in a better place than it was before, And then after a couple of PCSs through that position, that'll be the best position, it'll be operating the best that it can be, right? If we all just kind of, again, take the mindset that everything can be improved.